Good morning. Thank you for coming today. As I said a couple of minutes ago, we are recording this presentation and it will be posted later on this week on our website, so keep an eye out. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Claudia Granillo and I am the community organizer for the Wellbeing Partners. This is our first Partners for Healthy School meeting of the year, so we're really excited. And it's our first virtual meeting as a Partners for Healthy School, and it's very weird, and I understand that it's weird times. So I'm just gonna give a little bit of FYI. If you have any questions at any point of the presentation, please put them in the chat box. Sheila, who is our admin, and I will be checking that and making sure that we ask the questions or answer the questions. Additionally, Sheila is our tech support for today, so if you need any help with tech, please send her a chat directly. And then we have Megan, who is our intern, and she will be taking minutes for us today. So look out for those after this meeting. And with that, I'm going to get started. Our agenda for today is welcome and updates. We will have two presentations, one from Dr. Dinkle and JP Rett, which is about physical activity, and then one from Dr. Reading Rodriguez about body positivity, and then we'll do a closing. So I'm gonna get started. We have some updates about basically us. As you know or may not know, we merged with the Wellness Council of the Midlands in January and became the Wellbeing Partners. All of our work stayed the same. However, we now have a workplace wellness side of the organization, so that just allows us to reach more people with our mission, which is to, sorry, my mind is going really fast. With our new mission, which is to build well-being into the way communities grow and do business. We continue our youth wellness work, which we now offer as a cohesive package and have branded as Activate Youth, which that includes Partners for Healthy School, 5432 and Go, and our Safe Routes to School programs. All of these programs, we are trying to reach as many people in as many places. So we are working with after school programs, community organizations, and OPS. We are expanding into Sarpy and Cass counties, so we will have more information about that as the school year progresses. And then we also want to let you know that we have a youth wellness page. Just like we used to have a Live Well Omaha Kids page, we now have the Wellbeing Partners Youth. And with that, I am going to ask those on the call to please share your name, your organization, and any updates for 2020. If you don't have any updates, that's okay. You can just share your name and your organization. I'm gonna start off with, oh man, let me see. I guess with Martha, if that's okay.
That's okay. Hi, I'm Martha Bruckner, and I am the Executive Director of MOEC, which is the Metropolitan Omaha Education Consortium. And we live at the CEC, and we're glad to be absolutely anything that says Partners for Healthy Schools we're in. Thanks for letting us be here.
Thank you for coming. Next on my screen is Lacey Peters.
Hi, I'm Lacey Peters, and I'm the Health and Physical Education Specialist with the Nebraska Department of Education. And I guess an update that I would share, mainly because a lot of people on this call were part of the advisory council, our state health education standards writing is just wrapping up. So we should have a draft one to get to the advisory council for feedback by the end of August, beginning of September. So stay updated or posted for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Next on my screen is Carrie Miller.
Hello, everyone. I am Carrie Miller with Nebraska Extension in Omaha. I guess if there's any youth that need to be taught, we would like to teach them about food and nutrition, cooking, physical activity. So send them my way. We are doing classes virtually. We haven't done any, I guess, in person since, but we're open to doing that when things open back up. So contact me if you want any virtual Zoom classes for youth and their parents together as well.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, next on my screen is Temi Onayemi. I don't know if I pronounced your name correctly, but if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name's Sammy Oniemi. You pronounced it great. Most people mess it up. But I'm just like here with Claire, our youth ambassadors for Nebraska Appleseed. We're kind of just like checking in to see what, what you guys are kind of up to today.
Awesome, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
Okay, next up is Claire Bring.
Yeah, hi, I'm Claire. As Temi said, I'm with Nebraska Appleseed. Yeah, and we have 2 updates. The summer meals sites are really going well, and we just recently updated the map. So I'll go ahead and throw the link to the map there that has all of the sites, as well as pandemic EBT application is available through July 19th. So we're just urging everyone to make sure that eligible families are applying to that.
Awesome, thank you. And I know you said there might be a link for those updated maps. Do you think you could drop that in the chat so we can add it to the minutes?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and throw that link right now.
Thank you. Okay, next up I have Pam. Okay. Maybe I'll come back to Pam in a second. Lisa Schultz. Oh, we can't hear you. No.
Hi, sorry about that. It's been forever. Hi, hello. I'm the Education and Training Manager for the Women's Fund of Omaha. Let's see, we're supposed to share updates for 2020.
Yes.
So, of course, with COVID-19, a lot of things have shifted with our work and our training, and a lot of things have been moved online, as well as our Get Checked Omaha folks are continuing to provide, I think, sexual health and reproductive health services, but it looks a little bit differently. But our Get Checked Omaha website is current with any sort of changes around hours and protocols and that sort of thing. So please check that out. Other than that, I think that's really it. Thanks, Claudia.
Awesome, thank you. Next up, I have Jennifer Fleming.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Fleming, and I'm with Millard Public Schools, and I do the growth and engagement piece for food service. And yeah, I'm just here to get information and learn more things right now. I mean, update though, we have 10 sites serving food, free breakfast and lunch every day of the week. So yeah, if you want more information about that, or if you know people that could benefit from it, let me know and I'll give you the information.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. If you have any links, if you want to drop them in the chat, we would really appreciate that.
Perfect.
Thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go to Dr. Dinkle. If she'd just like to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Danae Dinkle. I'm an associate professor at UNO in the school. I don't talk to people very much, apparently. In the School of Health and Kinesiology. Don't worry, I'll try to get that ironed out before we start our presentation here. I teach and do research around physical activity and health promotion, and good to see several familiar faces on the call.
JP, if you'd like to go next.
All right, I'm JP Rec. I work underneath Dr. Dinkle in the Physical Activity and Health Promotion Lab as a doctoral research assistant, and I will be helping her present today as well.
Okay, Dr. Liam, if you'd like to go next.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liam Hearton Rodriguez. I'm an assistant professor in the Grace Abbott School of Social Work at UNO, also part of the Midland Sexual Health Research Collaborative. It's nice to meet you all.
Alrighty, I'm gonna go over to the well-being staff. So Chantel, if you'd like to kick us off.
Hi, I'm Chantel Green. I'm part of the Wellbeing Partners staff, and I'm just joining today to learn and fit in.
Sheila, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hi, my name is Sheila Hansen. I am also with the Wellbeing Partners staff. I am on call this morning to help with tech issues. So if you have any problems with connection or audio or anything, drop that in the chat to me and I will see what I can do to help get it straightened out.
Thank you. And then last but not least is Megan.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm an intern with the Wellbeing Partners, and I am here to take notes.
Yay, thank you, Megan. Did I miss anybody? Okay. Well, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So today we have a presentation from Dr. Dinkle and JP on physical activity. Dr. Dinkle is a professor of health and kinesiology at UNO. Her interests include developing and evaluating evidence-based physical activity programs, as well as identifying factors that impact children's ability to live a physically active lifestyle. And JP is a graduate research assistant and PhD student at UNO, and his interests include physical activity behaviors in children and in schools. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Dinkle and JP.
Yeah, thanks, Claudia, and thank you all for jumping on today. I know many of you are advocates for physical activity, and this presentation is just kind of a general overview of the benefits. So for those of you who know some of this information, hopefully we'll be able to give you a few key tidbits or things to help your advocacy efforts throughout this. And for those who don't, hopefully we give you some good tidbits of information to help your advocacy efforts for encouraging children to be physically active. We go to the next slide, Claudia. So again, we're going to do a general overview of physical activity, how we can incorporate physical activity in schools, and also importance of physical activity for staff wellness. Keep going. Next slide. So benefits of physical activity, I think oftentimes when even as adults, we think about those benefits more closely linked to the physical benefits. And we do see those physical benefits in children. So those kids who are physically active tend to have stronger muscles and bones, improved sleep, and in relation to physical activity in schools and just physical activity in general, most studies show, not surprisingly, that there is a positive impact to student health. And while some studies might show little improvement, it's just important to know that there's no studies that have really shown a negative impact to increasing physical activity for children on student health or academic behavior. So another kind of key research finding probably over the last couple decades and increasing and peaking esteem is how physical activity really helps cognitive function. So recent systematic reviews have shown that really physical activity has a causal link to cognitive function in general. So showing that physical activity does cause improvements in brain health. And as you can kind of see in the classic pictures of the brain sitting quietly versus the brain while walking, that being active helps to stimulate those pieces in the brain. So again, lots of research showing not only standardized test scores, improvements in standardized test scores, but also a recent meta-analysis that came out showing that there were improved scores using progress monitoring tools. So essentially those general tests that teachers use, not the standardized ones, but that, to show progress in the items that they're teaching, that physical activity is linked to those as well. And also importantly, it's linked to improved behavior. So there's been numerous studies that have shown incorporating classroom physical activity can help improve on-task behavior within the classroom, and then also decreased out-of-seat behavior and off-task talking. So one thing that I realized when I was re-looking through these slides was that the other big thing that I always like to emphasize with physical activity is it's linked to mental health. So I know that's a big community concern right now, and the literature that's out there on children's physical activity and depression has shown a moderate impact, showing that causal association between physical activity and depression. And I think that the literature will continue to increase. Right now, there's just not enough studies to show that impact related to depression and anxiety, or a broader impact on depression and then also related to anxiety. But we do know that in adults, physical activity is really closely linked to decreased odds of experiencing depression and anxiety, as well as potential treatments for those as depression and anxiety. So with being able to establish these physical activity behaviors in childhood, we know that that links longitudinally. So if we can establish physical activity in childhood as they grow, you know, they're more likely to be physically active as adults. And there's been studies showing that once people are physically active as adults, oftentimes it's more of like a personality trait where it's stable across time, instead of something that just kind of comes and goes. All right, now I'm ready for the next slide, Claudia. So just a quick reminder, the physical activity guidelines for kids, 60 minutes of moderate to vigorous physical activity is what the literature has shown to have the most health benefits. And so you guys can kind of see through there examples of what those might be, running, jump roping. And we also want to make sure that they have the muscle strengthening and bone strengthening activities at least 3 days per week. So oftentimes this can come through just kids playing outside, or it can come through physical education classes if they're in class, or it could come through recess, or a bunch of different ways. But it is important that they are provided opportunities in order to be able to develop those muscles and bones. Next slide. Okay, so why do we need more opportunities for physical activity? Well, I'm sure you guys are well aware there's a lot of challenges to that. And again, a lot of times people link this to weight, and over a third of kids in the metro area are overweight or obese. And while obviously, unless it's paired with healthy nutrition, those kids who are physically active, it can help to control weight. And so it's important to give us opportunities for that, let alone the other benefits that we also mentioned. And then while nationally, stats show about 2 out of 3 kids do not meet those recommended guidelines of 60 minutes of physical activity, much vigorous physical activity per day. We do, the latest community health needs assessment showed a little over half of metro area children met guidelines, and the question I think was that they were active for at least 60 minutes a day, every day in the last week. So we'll say in general, self-report data tends to over-report physical activity levels. So I'd be surprised if we did have that many. I would be very excited if at least half of the children were doing that. But I'm guessing that objectively, there's probably a little bit less than that. Additionally, there's disparities kind of across genders. So regardless of race, age, income levels, girls are less active than boys, and we find that in our local data as well. And then there's a pretty dramatic decrease in physical activity as kids grow older. So I think our local data even said, I think about 3/4 of 2 to 40-year-olds were, active 60 minutes a day, although younger kids should be active for longer than that, but we're talking about school-age children today. And as they start to get up into their teen years, that drops to a little bit less than 30%. So it can be very challenging to provide opportunities, and there's a lot of reasons for that drop, but making sure that providing opportunities across those time periods and encouraging kids to be active. And the other thing that's important to know is while the physical activity guidelines really focus on that moderate to vigorous physical activity, there's increasing evidence about the importance of sedentary time. I'd say a majority of the literature out there on sedentary time, as adults, that we can meet the physical activity guidelines and sit the rest of the day and still have some increased health risks. And there's some additional literature that's coming out in kids for some of those same effects. So as adults are sitting more, kids are sitting more, and it can lead to negative health outcomes for that. Additionally, we see there's some information linking increased sedentary time with mental health challenges with kids too. So increased sedentary time potentially linked to depression and such things. So again, trying to get kids to up and active throughout the day is really important. So specifically in schools, there obviously are some barriers that schools experience to trying to encourage kids to be more physical activity. This is a study that looked at institutional barriers within the school system and also individual barriers for the teachers. So obviously lack of time, when we look at the school days, there's a lot of things that need to happen, a lot of curriculum that needs to be covered, access to facilities or equipment. So if we have enough space to be able to do something, if we have the type of equipment, so if you wanted to do some type of non-traditional standing desks or having exercise balls for kids to sit on, that can cost, it does cost money. And also sometimes we rely on our physical education teachers and classes to really get all of their physical activity in there or learn the skills that they need to in there. And while we have a lot of great physical education teachers in our community, we also need to make sure it can't solely rely on them, because kids don't have PE every day. And so how do we help supplement the work and things that they're learning in PE class throughout other aspects of the day? Lack of planning time. It obviously takes time for teachers to incorporate physical activity into their day, and there just is a lack of planning time for that. Lack of professional development. So oftentimes teachers only get in their teacher preparation classes one class to learn about how to incorporate physical activity into the classroom. And depending on the school or university that they went to, I've heard from other colleagues that sometimes these classes can really be focused on, like, this is how we do it in PE, not necessarily like how do they incorporate it into the classroom. So that can be a challenge. And also it's, while depending again on where they go to school, other classes might incorporate this, but they may not. And so if you need to do professional development or, they need fresh ideas, it can be challenging if there's not time or professional development related to this. Also support from other staff administration. A few years ago, well, it's probably about 5 years ago, we had done a project with teachers in the Omaha Metro around trying to increase classroom physical activity, and did some surveys and qualitative interviews, and found that some teachers felt like their either other staff that they worked with or the administration disapproved of when they were doing physical activity. So I specifically remember there was one teacher that if she saw that the principal was walking around in the hallways, she made sure that the kids were sitting down in class, because she'd been reprimanded for them not learning and things like that. And also, as I'm sure you guys can read, those ones with asterisks are ones where they were both found in elementary schools and in secondary schools. Next slide. So the teacher-related barriers, not too much different than those institutional, obviously related to the lack of training, difficulty providing safely planned and structured lessons, again, depending on how your classroom is set up, if it's not set up to allow for physical activity. And not having time to plan relates to poor planning. Again, that reliance on the physical education teachers in classrooms. Another big thing is people's personal school experiences in physical education. So there was a study that came out last year or the year before from Iowa State, where there was a big online survey. They asked people about their experiences in PE when they were kids and their current physical activity levels. And they found that those people who had really poor experiences in PE were less physically active as adults. And they had some open-ended questions where people could still recount the horrible memories that they had 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road from when this actually happened. So if there are teachers out there who are not physically active themselves, they had poor experiences in PE, they're probably less likely to promote classroom physical activity because they don't have the self-efficacy for that themselves. And then also colleagues potentially undervaluing those activities, like I mentioned from the example before. And obviously COVID, right? So the challenges of trying to offer physical activity through Zoom calls and different things like that, definitely in our traditional way that we did coursework, COVID definitely put a spin and an additional challenge of that. So there's basically, I don't be all humdrum, there is positive ways, but there are ways that we can help incorporate. And I think if we look at it as a shared school collective of everybody kind of chipping in and trying to do their part. And I would say that any of these different, whether it be before school or after school activities, recess, physical education, movement in the classroom or classroom physical activity, these are all places where there are opportunities for physical activity, and none of them really replaces the other. So it isn't to say that, you know, if we really increase, happen to be able to increase a PE every day, which would, you know, be amazing, but that doesn't mean that kids shouldn't have that movement in the classroom. You know, physical education is a great place for students to learn physical literacy, learn about those specific motor skills, and, you know, practice those things. And movement in the classroom is really great for decreasing that sedentary time, for helping that on-task behavior so kids can learn better. Before and after school opportunities, I know, as Claudia already mentioned, the Wellbeing Partners does some really great opportunities for that. So things like safe routes to school, those before school and after school clubs. If kids are old enough to participate in sports or some other type of youth activities, those all serve different purposes for being able to socialize with others and different things outside of like a PE class, outside of the classroom. And recess too, it's a time for them to have that autonomy and the type of activities that they want to do, to socialize with other peers, and have some freedom in how they want to express their activity. So it would not be one of my presentations if we did not have some type of physical activity. So this is something that we would typically, you're not going to sweat for this, I promise, but an example of a way to at least break up some sedentary time. So feel free to stand up or not. I think most people have their videos off, so we won't see your bellies if you want to do this. But this is called Snap Wink. So you can do this sitting too if you want to. So stand up or stay seated, it's up to you. I'll have you wink your left eye, snap your right hand index finger and thumb at the same time, wink your right eye, snap your left, do that a couple times. I'm trying to do it too. Now you're gonna add a stomp when you wink and you snap. So left eye, right hand, and let's try right foot. You can stomp either way, but just try to alternate that and doing some stomping. Yeah, more challenging. It's even challenging to say it out loud. So this is an activity that kind of helps to engage different hemispheres of the brains. It's something that's recommended for 3rd to 5th grade, but you could really do it with any ages, as we're showing right here. And now I'm going to hand it off to JP, who can go into a little bit more detail about some of these different activities. Or
yeah, so like Dr. Dinkle was saying, all these opportunities should not replace one another in the school day, because each opportunity presents different benefits and exposes students to a variety of physical activities. And this helps students to develop a good relationship and attitude with physical activity, because they learn that physical activity isn't just playing sports. And like Dr. Dinkle was saying, this kind of helps them establish the relationship now early on in their life so that it can promote, so that they live healthy, active lives throughout their whole entire life. So start off with before and after school activities. Like Claudia was saying and Dr. Dinkle, these can include programs that are intended to be physically active, like the Safe Routes to Schools, or programs that can benefit from students being physically active by incorporating the physical activity best practices, which we will talk and discuss a little bit later on in the slides. And these programs can include Safe Routes to Schools or walking school bus to encourage active transportation to and from schools. The Wellbeing Partners actually found that currently only about 14% of students in the Omaha area actively commute. And this is pretty similar to the national levels that have shown anywhere from 10 to 15% of school-age children use active transportation to schools. And we've seen this decrease over decades, because in the 1970s, as many as 50% of students were using active transportation to and from schools. So active transportation programs should also work to make sure that the community amenities are conducive to active commuting by having sidewalks that are safe and clean, having adequate signs and markings, and other calming devices so that parents, as well as the children, feel safe in allowing, so parents feel safe in allowing their children to walk or bike to and from school. And also, before an active school activity consists of other opportunities for programs or programs available for children to be physically active or learn about healthy behaviors. But this also can include academic related programs or clubs that may not be specifically tailored towards physically active or physical activity, but could benefit from having students be physically active, such as tutoring programs or other specified like math clubs or science clubs or things like that. So the main idea here is that we want students who are not involved in interscholastic or recreational sports teams, just so they know that there are other groups that they can be a part of that are physically active. Okay, Claudia, now you can go, sorry. So recess is the most common way for children to be physically active in the school environment. And as Dr. Dinkel was saying, what makes recess different from the other activity opportunities is that it allows students autonomy or freedom of choice in their physical activity endeavors. And it is very, gives them a great opportunity to kind of freely socialize and interact with other students, which helps to develop those, that healthy relationship with physical activity. So we have these five categories for recess planning. And these are all kind of more tailored to what school administrators and school districts can do to improve the recess culture in a school. So the first one is make leadership decisions. School administrators should really take the initiative in making the leadership decisions to provide students with at least 30 minutes of recess each and every day. In my opinion, I think 30 minutes seems pretty low, but on average across the United States, children are receiving about 27 minutes of recess every day. So not quite meeting the mark there of the 30 minutes, but getting pretty close. And then leaders should also identify recess policies, develop a written plan, designate recess areas for both indoor and outdoor, and establish weather guidelines. The next one is communicate and enforce behavior and safety expectations. So children should be made well aware of the recess and playground rules and regulations. And these rules should really remain consistent throughout the different recess times throughout the school day, as well as stay consistent and stay the same throughout the school year, just so that students can learn those and completely understand what they are, how they're expected to act. And then 3 is create an environment supportive of physical activity during recess. So this involves creating an environment that is conducive to physical activity by providing both fixed and portable equipment. So fixed, obviously just the playground, and portable such as balls, jump ropes, and other things that children can use or play with and that can be taken and removed from the playground or recess area. Another way to make the environment more conducive of physical activity is offering structured recess, and this is more of a viable option in order to engage and get those students who are maybe more inactive during recess to be more active. And then also, if recess has to be taking place indoors, this doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for children to be not physically active, especially if they're in their classroom. And I'll kind of talk about later how I said with the before and after school programs that active classroom best practices can be used during these indoor recess times as well. The fourth one, engage the school community to support recess. So not only teachers should be knowledgeable about the benefits of recess, but also parents as well. You know, trying to get the parents on board that physical activity is very important to the success of their students' academic performance. And, you know, just giving them the reasons why recess should be a part of each and every school day. So that schools should really be seeking to educate not only teachers, but also parents in the importance of recess. And then the last one, gather information on the recess. Schools should gather information, seek out information from various resources like Shape America or Action for Healthy Schools, or even their state's education department. They should really be accessing these things on a regular basis in order to improve the recess culture of their school. All right. So this last one here that we'll talk about, we want movement in the classroom. So we're focusing on these three rather than physical education, just because, as Dr. Dinkle was saying, these three should not be viewed as a way to replace physical education, but rather another way to enhance the physical opportunities that children have in their school day. So, so this includes both active learning and active breaks. These opportunities can either be rhythmic or non-rhythmic, and these activities can be done or can be used, like I said, during before after school programs and also during indoor recess. So currently movement in the classroom is sporadic and inconsistent, but we want to move towards active classroom practices as a normal, consistent and systemic part of the school day. So first I'll kind of talk about what active learning is. So active learning often involves matching movements to key points in the lessons to help students remember and to improve their memory. So one activity that I enjoy teaching or showing teachers is body clocks. So this involves the students constructing the different numbers on the clocks, letting them be creative in designing their own clock, and then they can lay out these numbers on the floor in a circular shape, just representing the clock. And then they lay down on the ground and they use their arms and legs as the hands of the clock to tell the time. Another one that I really like is the idea of constructing a walking path in the classrooms. So this can serve multiple purposes, and it can be used both as an active learning opportunity and an active break. And teachers can use this to teach about things like the Oregon Trail, the Mayflower Route, or the pilgrimage, animal migration routes, or even for like an art gallery, the students can follow along the path and look at all the different students' art that they created. But however, there are numerous other ways to incorporate physical activity, and they can be used in all subjects as well. Next is the active breaks. So this is just giving the students an opportunity to be physically active and kind of turn their minds off for a little bit away from learning in the curriculum. And it gives them just the opportunity, like I said, to be physically active in the classroom. And this can often occur during the transition periods from subject to subject. Students should never remain seated in their desk for an hour or more. And to me, I think hopefully you can get them up and moving at a more frequently than just an hour at a time. But yeah, it just gives them an opportunity to get up out of their desks, which allows them time to refresh and prepare their minds for new and more learning, which also gives the teachers kind of time to kind of unwind and kind of just take a break. And so, as we mentioned earlier, both active lessons and breaks can improve the academic performance for children of all learning abilities. This has just been seen across all learning abilities of students. And these opportunities do not need to take up much time, maybe 1 to 10 minutes. If you only have a minute, try to use it. And to help teachers be more efficient with their time, teachers should work on using consistent routines and start and stop signals. Simple stop signals just as go or stop, which is something that's vocal and that children can easily understand and learn and follow along to. A big one too is if students are going to be grouped, the teachers should already have the groups picked out before starting the activity. So if it's, group them if they have a group of the day where they are already designated to a group and you're not numbering out the students or saying, okay, boys or girls, just having that grouping strategy already figured out. And I like to use what I call the 3 Gs. So in order to start a activity break or any physical activity with students. So first, like I said, you want to group them, have those pre-designated groups. Next is to give clear, next G is give. Have clear, specific instructions that are easy to follow for students, and then get them going. Having a prompt, you know, when I say go or on my go, do this, this, and this, which are your instructions, okay, go. And so quick, easy, just like that, going so that it's not taking up a whole lot of time. So this is just part of having a good behavior management plan in place to make these classroom strategies an easy thing to incorporate. But also we want to focus on making sure that we are encouraging students, making it enjoyable for the students, and this will make it enjoyable for the leader or the teacher as but yeah, there's endless resources out there. So just don't be afraid to seek out those resources. Don't be afraid to ask other teachers or other colleagues, because the more we talk about it with our colleagues, the more likely that it's going to become a consistent and systematic thing within schools and other child programs. All right, next one. So hopefully you didn't see the answer yet, but little pop quiz, true or false, you must have at least 10 minutes of time to conduct classroom physical activity. Anyone can shout it out.
True.
So you must have at least 10 minutes.
Oh, maybe
True
not.
We appreciate your participation, Carrie.
Yes, we appreciate your participation.
It seems like a trick question.
It can be a trick question. So it is false. So like I just said in the previous slide, if you just have 1 minute of time, this can be really impactful on just helping students refresh their minds, you know, get them prepared for new learning. All right, next one. So, so we also want to focus on staff wellness. So oftentimes when we think of schools, we just think of students being physically active, pursuing healthy behaviors, but we also want to take care of our teachers and staff as well. This is especially true since 1 in 5 teachers feel tense about their jobs compared to about 1 in 8 workers in similar professions. So we are seeing that teachers are feeling a little bit higher levels of stress and anxiety and tense just in regards to their jobs. Social support is crucial for teachers' self-efficacy and mental health. So physical activity can really provide, like we were talking with the students, but it can also provide really good social support, kind of have that sense of relatedness amongst your colleagues or other friends that you might have, which can really benefit your self-efficacy and your mental health. And the more experienced teachers report having higher levels of emotional labor. Again, like students, physical activity can really have a benefit on their emotional regulation skills, but this is also true for us, for adults, for working age, older adults. Being physically active can really help to kind of regulate your emotions and kind of get that anxiety and stress out. And these 4 main sources of teaching stress were recognized in a study, and they're kind of categorized under school organization, job demands, work resources, and your social and emotional competence. And of course, physical activity is not going to directly solve these issues or problems, but it can help to relieve some of that stress that the teachers are experiencing. Just gives them some time to step away from kind of the real life, what's really going on in their jobs in real life, and just kind of have time to themselves or with their friends, and being healthy at the same time. Next one. So how do we get staff to be more physically active? So we can find it, so we really encourage, and this goes for really anyone, find an activity that you love and enjoy. You know, just walking for 30 minutes during the day, or even if you don't have a chunk of 30 minutes, try to find 3 different times where you have 10 minutes to walk. You know, breaking this up, even the benefit of having 10 minutes just to walk really helps to break up that sedentary time. And then Dr. Dingle can elaborate a little bit more on this.
So this made me think of when I did my undergrad at University of Nebraska at Kearney, and a couple of my teachers at the time, I heard them talking about this WAFA club, and I'm like, what is the WAFA Club? And it was the Women Against Flabby Arms group. So it was a couple of faculty members and undergrad that they would get together like 3 mornings a week and work out together to battle their flabby arms. And so I just thought it was a great example of pulling together some friends, finding a shared enjoyed activity, and a way to get that social support within the school setting.
And then, so, sorry, a few more points. So another idea is to make the Teachers Lounge a wellness zone. You know, good nutrition goes hand in hand with having a good physically active life, and also finding creative ways to incorporate movement areas into the Teacher Lounge. If this is just one corner of the Teacher Lounge where it has maybe a yoga ball or maybe some resistance bands or other workout equipment, simple workout equipment where they can just be somewhat active, but still kind of in a more relaxing environment. And also, I mean, incorporating ways to walk and work at the same time, whether this is walking during planning periods or if it's, I mean, walking when you're meeting with other teachers. And then lastly, take part in activities with the students. Don't be afraid, I mean, we want to encourage teachers and other people who are leading physical activity or working with groups of students to not be afraid to be active and moving with the students. You know, when children see that adults or the people, their role models are doing physical activity, they're more likely to engage in that activity and be more focused on the task that is at hand. So that is all we have. Is there any questions? I think I saw one in the chat.
I wanted to mention one thing, and with a classroom physical activity or movement in the classroom, we are partnering with the Wellbeing Partners and a colleague over in teacher education to develop a video series that'll be available to teachers. Given all of the challenges with COVID, will be, I think, we have about 8 different, anywhere from 8 to 10-minute videos that we'll have with a bunch of different resources. So whether that one of them is specific to how to help incorporate physical activity during Zoom sessions or at home, and also trying to pull some resources for secondary schools. We know that that can be a challenge as well. A lot of the research has been in elementary schools, and so that will be forthcoming at the end of July, beginning of August, to share out with your networks. Now we're ready for any questions.
Yes. Any questions? I know Kate put in the chat that she loves the idea of staff wellness in the club. So we so often move right past our teachers on the front line. So she says, thank you. Anybody else? And as you can see, if you have any more questions, there's some helpful, you know.
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't put our contact information in there, but we are we are trying to post more infographics and different quick activity ideas for teachers, for childcare providers, for kids, for moms, all different kind of things. So feel free to follow us and check out some of those resources. Yeah, they will be, those series will be available statewide, Lacey. So as soon as our goal is to have them all recorded and to the Wellbeing Partners by the end of July, and then they'll be up to share with whoever and wherever you want them to go.
And then I'll make sure to include their Twitter handle, the Facebook handle, and then emails in the minutes. Okie doke. Any more questions? All right, we're gonna move on. Thank you, Dr. Dinkle and JP. Sorry I was moving too quickly on those slides. My finger was not cooperating.
Thank you for managing that.
Yes. Okay, so next we have Dr. Liam Herding Rodriguez. He is a professor at the Grace Abbott School of Social Work at UNO. His interests in research are focused on the intersections of sexuality and social justice, and particularly how people with stigmatized bodies navigate their sexualities and relationships. So Dr. Liam, I'm going to stop sharing and let you take it away.
Great. Let me get this pulled up here. Okay. Are my slides showing okay, Claudia?
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay. So thanks so much to the Wellbeing Partners for inviting me to talk about body positivity, particularly how we can be using a body positive framework with young folks. I'll just say by way of introduction that we can't talk about body positivity on its own. The idea that we have a concept and a movement dedicated to telling people that their bodies are okay is nonsensical outside of the context of weight stigma. If we did not have weight stigma, if we didn't have anti-fat bias, if we didn't have sizeism as these really powerful social forces, body positivity would make no sense. So we have to talk about both of those in conjunction with one another. As Claudia mentioned, I work for UNO. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Social Work, where I do research on stigmatized bodies, specifically bodies that are perceived as being larger than is socially acceptable or socially desirable. And I use the term fat to talk about those bodies. And in just a little bit, I'll talk about why I use that term. But wanted to preview with that I am going to be using the term fat in this presentation. In addition to my academic work, I also have a private practice here in Omaha where I work with folks on a variety of issues, but one of the areas that I specialize in is body image issues and body acceptance issues. So I'll also be drawing a little bit on my clinical work as well as my research in this presentation. There's a lot to cover and not very much time to do it. So I'm gonna move pretty quickly, and I'm also gonna try and give you the big picture and pulling out the items that I think are most important for folks to know to provide a framework. But this is really just an introduction. We aren't gonna get into a lot of the nitty-gritty. I'll talk about some of the basic terms and the frameworks that I use in my work and that hopefully might be helpful to you in your work. I'll talk about the empirical research and what that tells us, and then provide you with some practice strategies to move towards a more body positive framework as we talk about youth wellness. And hopefully have some time for questions and answers at the end. So the first thing that I want to talk about is the term fat and why I use it. When I use the term fat, it oftentimes gets used as a pejorative, as a way of insulting people. And I want to be very clear that that's not how I'm using this term. I'm using the term fat as a bodily descriptor, so a way of describing certain types of bodies, and also as a social identity, that people who have this type of body have some shared social experiences that shape how they move through the world. I also use fat because in many ways, it's the most accurate, specific, and neutral term to describe people with larger bodies. And I'll use a couple other terms to contrast it with fat. Sometimes we use euphemism to talk about bigger bodies, right? We'll talk about bodies as being like big boned or chubby, or in some like very gendered ways, we'll talk about curvy as a like code for bigger bodies or for fat bodies. And when we use codes and euphemisms to talk about bodies, we imply that there is shame around those bodies and that those bodies are somehow outside of the norm, and that we need to have these fluffy words to talk about them. And so we want to stay away from euphemism when we talk about bigger bodies. There's also medicalized language to talk about bigger bodies. Oftentimes people use terms like overweight and obese to talk about folks with larger bodies. And I don't use those terms because it unnecessarily medicalizes folks who have bigger bodies and pathologizes their bodies. And also, in some ways, those terms are nonsensical and highly offensive. So take the term overweight, for example. To use a parallel, we would never call a tall person over height, right? We would never call a short person under height, right? That would make no sense to us. They're tall or they're short. In the same way, when we use the term overweight, we assume that there is an ideal weight, and that ideal weight is the same for everyone, and that we know what a person's ideal weight should be, and we know if they are over or under that ideal weight. And for most of us, I would argue for all of us, but certainly for most of us, that's not information that we have about a person, right? So that's a really inaccurate term to use in a lot of cases. And certainly not a neutral term to describe somebody's body. Same with terms like obese. Obese comes from the Latin, which means literally to eat yourself fat or to eat to excess, which is not the case for most folks, for many folks, maybe even for all folks, right? There is a lot of shame implied in that term obese. So for those reasons, I use fat as a term to describe folks with larger bodies in this like academic sense. Of course, when I'm working with individuals, I use whatever language they want me to use. So that's a little bit about the term fat and why you're going to hear it come up in this presentation. Also, body positivity means a lot of different things to different people. So I want to be clear about what I mean when I talk about body positivity. I kind of break it down into three primary areas. Body positivity is an acknowledgement that all bodies are intrinsically worthy and deserving, right? That is our baseline, that regardless of your body size, you deserve basic respect. You deserve to be treated with basic respect, and you are worthy as you are, right? Body positivity, in the way that I talk about it, also means accepting our bodies as they are. And I use the term accepting really purposefully. I think some people have the idea when we talk about body positivity that we need to love our bodies, that we need to love all parts of our bodies, and that we need to be in a constant state of loving our bodies. Which is great if you are at that place with your body. Most folks are not. Most folks, because of the social messages that we've received about our bodies, have some level of body dissatisfaction. And if we can move to a place where we feel neutral about our bodies or just accept our bodies as they are, I think that's a really positive step, right, for a lot of us. So that's really crucial to my understanding and my use of the term body positivity, that we accept our bodies. And then finally, that we appreciate our bodies for what they do for us, right? That we acknowledge the functionality of our bodies, that our bodies get us from place to place, our bodies allow us to move through the world, to experience joy, to experience pleasure, right? That's all part of body positivity. Within this conception of body positivity, there's lots of, I think, misunderstandings about what this means about like weight loss or weight gain. Can you be body positive if you are also trying to lose weight, etc.? What I wanted to focus on when talking about body positivity is that first part about our bodies being intrinsically worthy and deserving as they are. Our bodies do not get better the smaller they get, right? Our bodies are not worth more. They are not more valuable. They are not more deserving of basic human kindness and respect as they shrink, which is unfortunately the message that lots of folks have been given about their body. And this is an intrinsically gendered dynamic. Lots of women, specifically, lots of femme folks, have been told that their bodies are more worthy and more desirable the smaller they get. And these are messages that we learn very young. So, as I mentioned earlier, we can't talk about body positivity without talking about the flip side of it, talking about weight stigma, talking about anti-fat bias, talking about sizeism. These terms mean slightly different things, but I tend to use them, and in this presentation, I'll use them pretty interchangeably. They all talk about the devaluation and the denigration of people who are perceived to carry excess weight, people whose bodies are larger than what is socially desirable, people who are fat. And these are social devaluations and denigrations that lead to bias, prejudice, and discrimination. And I'll talk a little bit more about how discrimination against fat people plays out in our society. Also, we cannot have this conversation without acknowledging where these things come from, right? Weight bias, anti-fat bias, sizeism, these are not natural or normal states of being, right? These are not inevitable biases that people hold. These are learned behaviors, and they are learned in a context of white supremacy, of patriarchy, and capitalism, right? That tells us that some bodies are more valuable and are more desirable than other bodies. And that the denigration, the oppression, the exploitation of some people is justified because of bodily characteristics. We could spend our whole time talking about this. We won't, but we could. What I'll do instead is refer you to a really powerful book, Fearing the Black Body, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia by Sabrina Strings, in which she makes a really thorough and compelling argument that our fat phobia, our fear of and desire to get rid of bigger bodies is not about health, which is oftentimes how this conversation is framed. Instead, it's about who is deserving and who is worthy, who is good and who is not good. And that this is deeply tied to racism and sexism. Fat phobia does not impact all people equally. And that's played out through the research, and also anybody who's just existed in the world has probably seen this at play, that women and femme folks experience the brunt of fat phobia in a way that men, particularly white straight men, don't experience it. So also want to throw out there a framework that we can be using in our work as we recognize that, like, okay, if weight stigma, if anti-fat bias isn't ultimately, principally about health, that we need to rethink how we talk about body size in terms of health. One way that this is happening is through the Health at Every Size movement. This is a movement that's been around for the past 30, 40 years, that's been advocating for some really specific changes societally, but also within the healthcare system and within wellness practitioners, that we move to a model of weight inclusivity, of health enhancement, of respectful care, the idea that everybody deserves quality medical care regardless of their body size, which is not the case currently. We have lots of evidence that medical providers treat larger patients, treat fat patients differently, and provide them with less care than their thinner counterparts. Also moving towards eating for well-being, and we can contrast that with eating for nutrition, that we need to eat for total well-being, and also a move towards life-enhancing movement, that physical activity should not be primarily about exercise. It should be about movement that brings us joy. And I'll talk about these in a little bit more detail in just a little bit. I want to share some of the research with you around weight stigma, what we know about it, and because what we know about it is going to kind of lead us to what would be alternative practices, what would be body positive practices. What we know is that weight stigma occurs across the lifespan, so it occurs within all age groups, and in all life domains. So we see weight stigma showing up in people's lives within the educational system. We see it within healthcare systems. We see it in employment settings, within the media, even within our personal relationships, our families, our friends. We are experiencing, or bigger people experience, weight stigma in all of those areas. The weight stigma that children experience is particularly damaging and particularly intense. We know from lots and lots of research, and this is just a sampling of some of the citations that point to this, but fat children experience really high levels of social rejection and high levels of peer victimization. Children learn fat phobia, they learn anti-fat bias at a very young age. But we do know that it is learned because there is an age group, a younger age group in which it doesn't hardly show up, and then a big increase in anti-fat bias within a year, right? So we know that there's a point in childhood in which folks are learning anti-fat bias, they are learning weight stigma, and then engaging in social rejection or engaging in peer victimizing behaviors. And this has lifelong impacts on folks. I really appreciated how Dr. Dinkle brought up people's traumatizing PE experiences. In the research that I've done, which is all qualitative interviews with folks, which we're not even about physical activity, we're not about PE in any way, but folks brought up their traumatizing experiences, and having people in my office crying 50 years later about how they were treated by their peers, and in some cases treated by their teachers and other school officials. We know from the research that teachers also hold anti-fat bias and are unfortunately a source of victimization for young folks. So it's not just coming from their peers, it's also coming from teachers and academic staff. It's also coming from family members. Again, in my own research, family members were a particularly powerful source of anti-fat bias in people's lives. And that relationship was really strong, particularly between mothers and daughters. So again, that idea that weight stigma is all around us. And for larger folks, there is oftentimes no relief from it. There's no place to turn to get away from that anti-fat bias. Body dissatisfaction, excuse me, and dieting and other unhealthy weight control and weight loss behaviors are pervasive, they're normalized, and they're long lasting. And the research on this varies. You'll see different prevalence rates around body dissatisfaction and dieting, particularly in young people, depending on the study, the population, the methodology they're using. But anywhere from 40 to 60% of adolescents, children and adolescents, are engaged in some form of dieting or weight loss behaviors. If you look at subsections, particularly if you look at, most of the research is binary in this area, so looking at girls, you'll see that those rates are almost twice as high as they are for their male or boy counterparts. And this includes a large chunk of young people who are classified within healthy weight categories. So anywhere from 20 to 25% of adolescents who are already at what is a quote unquote healthy weight are still engaged in weight loss and dieting behaviors. One of the most common weight loss behaviors isn't even dieting, it is excessive exercise, excessive and compulsive exercise. So while we may have a chunk of folks who are not reaching these exercise guidelines or these physical activity guidelines, There's also a chunk of folks who are engaging in physical activity in really harmful ways to their body and in really compulsive ways, driven in many cases by intense body dissatisfaction and skewed body image. At the same time, we know that dieting doesn't lead to long-term weight loss. Over a 5-year period, there's research saying that the failure rate for diets is anywhere from 80 to 95% over a 5-year period. A larger percent of folks will experience some quote unquote success or weight loss in a short-term period, 1 to 2 years. But the vast majority of them will regain all of that weight, and many of them will gain more weight after that, which leads to this fluctuations, these large swings in people's weight, which some folks theorize is actually the cause of some of the health disparities that we see larger people experiencing, that it is not necessarily their larger body size, but it is their experiences of weight stigma and these large swings in weight that leads to some of these, what we would call negative health outcomes, which is where I want to really focus on here, is that weight stigma leads to negative health outcomes. That when folks, and this is seen in all sorts of different studies, longitudinal studies, twin studies, experimental designs, when folks are exposed to weight stigmatizing messages, they engage in more behaviors that we would consider, or that get considered as negative health behaviors. So people exposed to weight stigma messages engage in higher rates of binge eating. Folks who are exposed to weight stigma messages engage in exercise or physical activity avoidance at higher levels. So when people receive these stigmatizing messages, it does not lead to increased exercise or physical activity, it leads to decreased amounts of exercise and physical activity. In addition to a whole host of other negative health outcomes, lots of them related to mental health. We also know that weight stigma and all other forms of stigmatization are stressful experiences, and that stress itself is responsible for lots of negative health outcomes, including the health outcomes that oftentimes get associated with bigger bodies. Outcomes like higher blood pressure, cardiovascular issues, diabetes, etc. That stress is implicated in all of those. So what does this research tell us about what we as practitioners, we as caring adults for young folks, the practices that we should be engaging in? I'm going to throw out some different ideas that we can bring to our work. A lot of them are going to exist at this structural level. So changes in the way that we think, in the way that we act, rather than like these individual, how do we talk to one individual student? The first is that we don't use weight or body size as proxies for health. Weight and body size are not good indicators of health. And we shouldn't be collecting them in ways that conflate them with overall health. They don't tell us anything necessarily about the overall health of a population. Additionally, as much as possible, we should be focused on the social determinants of health rather than on people's individual behaviors. If we were to address social determinants of health, rather than having this real focus on like, how do we change individual people's nutrition related behaviors or individual people's exercise behaviors, we would get much better outcomes if we focused on access to healthcare, if we focused on access to safe spaces in order to engage in physical activity, if we focused on access to food, right? Addressing food deserts, etc., right? We would get much more bang for our buck with those sorts of activities. We need to, and this should go without saying, but the research tells us that it does need to be said, we need to be protecting fat students from victimization. And that includes victimization from faculty and staff, right? It is not just about peer relationships. It's also about how they end up getting victimized by the supposedly caring adults in their lives. This means having strong anti-bullying policies and programs in our school and explicitly addressing body-based and weight-based bullying within those programs. In addition, we should be monitoring for body image and disordered behaviors, right? Rather than just monitoring for like, for body weight or monitoring for amount of exercise time or like nutrition. We should be actively figuring out what sort of body image issues our students are experiencing, and if they're engaged in disordered eating behaviors or disordered exercise behaviors. I don't know, I haven't seen like the well-being partners, their measurements, or some of the community measures that Dr. Dinkle referenced in her presentation. But as much as we are monitoring for physical activity, we should also be monitoring for excessive and compulsive physical activity for the purpose of weight loss. When we talk about nutrition, when we talk about physical activity, I think that we need to talk about them in much more complex ways. Food, for example, is about much more than nutrition. People do not just eat to meet their nutritional needs. We eat for all sorts of reasons, right? We eat for pleasure, we eat for comfort, we eat for satiety, right? That feeling of being full. Our eating patterns are shaped by our cultures and our traditions. They're shaped by necessity. They're shaped by survival needs for many young people, right? And we need to take those into account when we give messages about nutrition and about what sort of food we believe people should be eating. And I think this next one fits in really well into what Dr. Dinkle was sharing with us, is that we need to be providing lots of different opportunities for joyful movement. And when we provide those opportunities, that we provide accommodations for people of all body sizes and all sorts of bodily abilities. And I use that term joyful movement. Oftentimes exercise in lots of different spaces, especially in like physical education classes and in sports. Exercise, physical activity is used as a form of punishment. Anybody who was made to run laps will remember that, or engage in X number of sit-ups or push-ups or climb up a rope, right? Like those are not about having fun, right? Those are about punishing people at specific levels. And so providing opportunities for people to engage in movement that legitimately brings them joy, whether that is walking or dancing or yoga or whatever the case may be, we need to provide those sorts of opportunities for folks. And that these opportunities need to be voluntary, that regardless of what an individual person's physical activity behaviors are or what their eating behaviors are, that we prioritize our values of self-determination and bodily autonomy. Finally, we need to be providing accurate, inclusive, and comprehensive sex education. And this may seem like a little out of left field here, but the best place or the most consistent place where young people get body positive messages, information around body image, media literacy, about healthy relationships, decision-making, safety and respect, bodily autonomy, the most consistent place that they get those messages in positive and inclusive ways is in sex education. And certainly these messages should be coming from lots of different areas, but sex education is a really powerful and effective delivery mechanism for body positive messages for young folks. Okay, again, really quick, really fast, but that's what I wanted to share with you today. And I'd be happy to address any questions that folks have.
Not a question, but just a couple of comments from Lisa. She said, thank you for making all these connections, especially racialized origins. We need to explore and shift how we talk about bodies and wellness. And then from Carrie Miller at Extension, she said, great information. Thank you. If anybody has any questions. Okay, I will provide Dr. Liam's information if you have a question afterwards, so that's okay. I'll put them in the minutes. And then if I don't see any more questions, I'm just gonna move on to our last great presentation from Dr. Dinkle. If we don't have any more questions, I am going to move on to our last slides just to say a thank you to you. Thank you. Please be sure to follow our youth work at our Facebook page, which is the Wellbeing Partners -Youth. We post a lot about, you know, all the things relating to families and kids' well-being. We post about our current work and work that we see other communities doing around Omaha. No, other community organizations doing around Omaha. If you'd like for us to share something, please let me know. My email is at the bottom of the screen, and Claire, who is our Youth Wellness Coordinator, is also on the other side of the screen. And we look forward to talking with you in the fall for our next Partners for Healthy School meeting. So thank you so much for your time. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And yeah, thank you for coming. I appreciate you. And minutes will be out sometime today. So thank you.
Thank you, Claudia.
Thank you. Okay. Pause my recording.